So in Psalm 73, we're going to talk about, and I labeled this sermon, the human dilemma. So our lives as sinful humans in this world, in a sinful world, they're all full of problems. We know that here. But one of the most prominent ones as Christians is probably the constant pull to the world view, based on what we see and hear from everybody around us. So our question that we must answer is this: so how do we consider the goodness of God and the justice of God when we see all around us are ungodly people, unrighteous people, ignoring God, living their best life and flaunting that success? While we compare our life of serving God, perhaps, doing what's right and barely getting by in one way or another. These questions, when boiled down, kind of create what is a very distinct human dilemma for all of us. We may see our neighbors with the large house, the 3-car garages full, all the latest toys and gadgets, speaking as if nothing can touch them, as if they owned the world. And we barely able to maybe keep the one daily driver operating every time, with a house that may or may not be big enough, with health problems that may or may not plague us. And we continue to struggle. Asaph, the author of this particular psalm, he records a time when that same exact question, that same problem plagued his own mind. And he records it using this psalm to process his thoughts and how he dealt with it. And so we'll begin here in verse 1 of Psalm 73. I'll be using the English Standard Version. That's just the one I use, so it's a little different from what you got. That's fine. So it says, "Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." So Asaph recounts here a time in his past, and he firmly states right away, he says, God is good. But at one point, he almost abandoned that fact. The question here is hard, especially throughout the world, where those who don't believe in God sometimes get pounded with the constant message, God is love. God is love. And what's very true, they often ask in rebuttal, if God loved us, then why does he allow fill in the blank to happen? And in response, these people leave and they follow their own way, because at least that feels good. At least they can do what they want. And it gives them a sense of pride in thinking that they can then do whatever they want. And even as Christians, we find ourselves brought to question God's ability, or perhaps more likely his reasoning, for allowing our suffering while letting others have none. Asaph recalls that he was envious of the arrogant in these first verses, and some would say that the author is a little bit of a fool then. But how quickly do we all fall to that snare? Even in little moments, in little ways, looking at other people, giving in to that same ideology. The Bible gives us a little background on the psalmist, and Asaph, it says, was a Levite, so he was from the priesthood tribe. He was a songwriter, wrote many of the Psalms, and he lived during the reign of King David and King Solomon, specifically mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 16 as one who led the people in song and praise. So by all accounts, Asaph was a good and godly man who knew God, walked with God, but he still, at one point, had this problem. Because God is sovereign and oversees all things, as humans, it's easy for us living in the sinful world to forget what that truly means. We tend to put God into a box and rationalize our arguments against what the Bible says until many of us, sadly, reach a point of deconstruction. And that is a point where the foundation of our faith begins to crumble. And we see this all over social media. Several people, men and women all over, leaving the faith due to one thing or another that, at least in their head, they rationalized in such a way with a false notion that they put to God, and then destroyed everything else that they built on with their faith. So my first point, however, remember who God is. Every human dilemma begins with a problem, and Asaph begins this psalm of his struggle with a declaration of the goodness of God. Here, the author follows what we must all remember, and that is to praise God and recognize who he is first above all else. Only when we can do that, even when our hearts are heavy, praising God in those hard times, will we be able to keep close to him as he sees us through that struggle. What Asaph said about God initially, he knew was true. God is good. However, it was the other truth at the time that bothered him. And that's what made him almost stumble away. But are we so different? We know God's truth, but how often do we seem to forget it in the fog of the world? Peter would learn this lesson directly from Jesus, as recorded in Matthew chapter 14, verse 25 through 30. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea, Jesus. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It is a ghost." And he cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Are we so focused on the waves in our lives that we forget Jesus? Asaph explains the reason for his stumble in the heart was heavy was because he saw the prosperity of the wicked. The psalmist is not alone in his thoughts, like the waves of our life, the calm sea in theirs. Every Christian has had these moments or seasons that cause them to look at those who aren't Christian. It's like, why are they living so well and seem to have no problems, while I always seem to be getting hurt or struggle in some way? And these pains can appear in many areas, of course: financial, health, job type, sickness, kids, family, other issues, the list goes on. And Asaph, he continues to describe what was bothering him in verse 4. "For they have no pains until death, their bodies are fat and sleek. They are not in trouble as others are, they are not stricken like the rest of mankind. Therefore pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out through fatness, their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff and speak with malice. Loftily they threaten oppression. They set their mouths against the heavens, and their tongues strut through the earth." Even though Asaph most likely saw, as we do today, several wicked and ungodly people suffering as well, it seemed more prevalent for the ones who did not. Today as well, many people across the world are suffering. Most of them are not Christian. Suffering is universal to us in a sinful world. However, because of the intensity with which some live while they prosper in their ungodliness, they seem to tower over the fact that they are not the majority. And so what makes the hard times in our lives worse is that the ungodly people of the world seem to be boasting and showing off how great their life is. And we can see this as well in social media and podcasts, news, and other places. People all over the world just trying to show off what they have, where they've been, how good they look, how much money they have, whatever it is. And all these things just are set to build envy into any who look upon it. Asaph states that was what it was in his own heart, and as we struggle with the same thing in our own. The author explains it was this boasting that made him take his eyes off Christ. And so my second point here, we need to recognize the reality. Recognize the reality. The psalmist states that pride is their necklace. In Isaiah, we learn that Lucifer's original sin and downfall was pride. It was pride in the first lie to Adam and Eve in the garden in Genesis chapter 3. Satan said they could be like God if they ate of the tree that the Lord had told them not to, building that pride in their heart. Today, pride has become a thing that is so encouraged and embraced, we've created a whole month to celebrate it. Pride is the necklace of the wicked. They openly embrace this sin. How good they feel, how well they live. Seeing this pride is what hurt the author's heart, as he considered the goodness of God with what seemed to look like this tolerance against evil. Asaph continues, he says, they speak with malice and they threaten oppression to those that are beneath them. To talk with malice would be to openly speak with ill intent toward another. And by their pride, the ungodly talk as if they can do anything. They also know best and won't listen to reason. And additionally, it is from that spoken malice that they threaten to oppress others. We see this on an individual level, perhaps, as you know, maybe some people who are a little vindictive all the time, coworkers, friends, seem to always like to hold something over someone else. But this goes up to a national level, as we see nations decide to flex that same exact attitude towards others, whether it's Ukraine, Israel, and I'm sure many other skirmishes in other parts of the world that are just not recorded or broadcasted at all. Some nation decided they were going to flex pride, speak with malice, embrace that attitude, and push to subdue another. They speak against God. They openly hate and curse God, worshiping the creation rather themselves rather than the Creator. Everyone seems to hear about those that are prospering even across the far reaches of the world, almost like their tongue, like as Asaph said, struts across the earth. Everybody knows who they are. Everybody knows how good they have it. They make sure. Have these same questions, though, burned in your mind? Asaph is continuing here, trying to understand the correlation between the godly and the ungodly, and he breaks this apart here, beginning in verse 10, Psalm 73 here. Therefore, his people turn back to them, and they find no fault in them. And they say, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are wicked, always at ease. They increase in riches. All in vain I have kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. For all the day long I have been stricken and rebuked every morning. I feel that in my soul sometimes. The author noted that others following these footsteps of the wicked, because just as he mentions, they scoff at the heavens and nothing happens. Easy to build a following of rebuke towards God when they seem to not get immediately punished for that. They say that God is ignorant or he's incapable of doing something. So they live as they please, and others join in because, well, they can do what they want and they like it and it looks good, feels good. God doesn't seem to stop it, doesn't seem to care. Why not? But as Christians, we need to remember not to look for them as inspiration, because the book of Proverbs will give us this warning in chapter 1, verse 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Do not consent. Asaph says it's hard to watch them as they live life easily, gain wealth quickly. And as Christians, we can kind of relate to this because literally, sometimes it feels every morning we wake up with some other kind of roadblock in our life. Why do I keep struggling with every turn, even though I live how I'm supposed to? They get the fast track. They're doing it the wrong way. I'm doing it the right way, and I've got the rocky climb up. But unfortunately, the Christian life is not easy, nor was it ever planned to be. My third point, understand our struggles. Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, then Jesus told the disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. The part of us that we deny is the part that wants to do what we want to do that is apart from what God has designed for us. Everybody has a cross they have to bear daily as we seek to become sanctified through the Holy Spirit, do better in our own life. We have to constantly deny what it is that we think we want when we know it goes against what God has said. And it's so hard sometimes. And that's why it's just easier for other people to say, I don't want to deny. I'll just live as I am. It is easier for a while. Peter would continue in his letters and take this statement direct from Jesus to heart as he applied it in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 and 7. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Like we often do, Asaph struggled to understand that the suffering in this life is the payment for holiness. We struggle in this life, but not because God needs to test the limits of our faith. I mean, he's seen us sanctified through Jesus' blood now at the end, but we need to. In order for us to keep going in this life, I need to know how strong my faith is. How am I growing? I only live in the moment. As humans, we only live in the moment, one by one. And it is in this moment that we see how our faith proves that we are sustained through Christ in these trials. Though the short years of this life can seem incredibly long, this is not our forever. Additionally, Satan likes to make the lives of ungodly look good so that we as Christians get distracted. In contrast, he simultaneously makes our lives more challenging, causing us to lose our focus on Christ and our goal, which is heaven. Satan can't have a Christian because we're eternally sealed in Christ. But as long as we live on this earth, he loves to keep us oppressed and depressed in any way he can to keep us from our mission of spreading the gospel and growing in Christ. So when we consider the goodness of God when the injustice seems prevalent in this life, we must remember that the justice of God is eternal for the next one, and our struggles here are part of the price. Asaph will continue in verse 15. If I had said, I will speak thus, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. But when I thought how to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task. Has anyone else tried to understand God here? This is a wearisome task. Asaph finishes, until I went to the sanctuary of the Lord, then I discerned their end. Asaph, he then cuts himself off, right? He's like, wait, I have this new perspective now. It has dawned on me. I've been made revitalized in my understanding. The clarity came, and he realized he didn't want to continue in that mindset and be a stumbling block to those that would come after him, to those he influenced, the children of the next generation. He didn't want them caught up in the words of his own despair. So he took a conscious and complex look and understanding to the meaning behind the reality of what the wicked are doing and what that life is for them. And he changed his mind and understood why the wicked seem to prosper while the godly do not. But then how did he do that? It became apparent when he came to the sanctuary of God. My fourth point, remember your focus. Remember your focus. What should you do when the world seems to crash down around you? We go to church. We go to prayer, our Bible study, whether collectively or together at home. And there you will find, as Asaph did, the viewpoint from eternity instead of just in the moment. When we focus on Christ instead of our problems, we see them as he sees them. And then because we tend to get just so caught up in the moment, whether it's the pain or pleasures of this life, one by one, the immediate needs and wants. But with God, it's not about the moments on this earth, but eternity with him. It's not about how good our life is here, but the destination of our souls. Asaph continues, truly, you set them in the slippery places. You make them fall to ruin. How they are destroyed in a moment, swept away utterly by terrors. Like a dream when one awakes. O Lord, when you rouse yourself, you despise them as phantoms. When my soul was embittered, when I was pricked in the heart, I was brutish and ignorant. I was like a beast towards you. So Asaph now is doing a little bit of self-reflecting on his previous mindset. And so initially in his heart, he says he felt himself slip as he watched the world of the wicked around him do whatever they want to do without a thought or care. But yet now, with the heavenly perspective, he realizes it's they, the wicked, who are slipping, not him. With the eternal viewpoint, Asaph sees now that though the wicked live well, for now, they are on the path to utter ruin. And if we hold that same viewpoint as Christians today, we understand that we suffer a little here. The 40, 60, 80, 100 years that we may be blessed to live on this life. But our eternal reward, the eternal life, is spent in bliss with Christ forever. Asaph compares the life of the wicked to that of a dream. It can seem sometimes long to us, but it is a dream almost here nonetheless. Because they will awaken from that, and suddenly they will find themselves met with the terror of judgment of God and eternal damnation for not repenting of that sin that they had. Building on the same metaphor, he correlates and says it's almost as if God is asleep. So we need to understand, it may seem like God is sleeping, but that's because we can't fathom the extent of the grace and patience of the Lord. Asaph knew God wasn't sleeping. Instead, he was patient. Patient. He used the analogy to bring it to terms we understand, and the fact is that soon God is going to run out of patience. One day God will awaken, so to speak, from this metaphor that Asaph uses, and the wicked people's destruction will be total and swift. The psalmist then follows up with his own shortcomings. He tells God he was bitter and envious of what he saw. It pricked his heart. He had forgotten in that moment the promises of God. And he states that because of that, he became ignorant. Are we not like Asaph here sometimes? That moment just kind of swells up around us, and we see and we know all the promises of God and what he did through the Old Testament, all the miraculous miracles, but then we hit our own little brick wall here in our life, and we're like, well, nope, I guess that's too big for God. Caught up just in what we have going on in our own life, forgetting to keep that focus on God. Titus chapter 3 in the New Testament instructs us to remember the truths of the gospel, where we came from, where our salvation came from, and what we are in Christ. Because if we don't intentionally remember these truths, we accidentally forget. Like Peter, who looked on the waves on his way while walking to Jesus, so quickly deterred, we often so quickly deter our own eyes. Asaph, momentarily here, deterred his own eyes. And he admits that he was like a beast towards God. He was angry and jealous at the instant sinful pleasures that went unchecked. He was upset that God had not yet acted on them. I know sometimes in my own life, and in your own, I suppose, if you reflect, you'll find that you're mad at God for his timing on something. Whether it's the bad things that happen to us or how long the good things happen to someone else that doesn't acknowledge him. But this attitude must be checked from the perspective of heaven. Then we'll see more of God's truth in the lies that Satan tries to give us. He continues in verse 23, nevertheless, I'm continually with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you will receive me to glory. In whom I am in heaven but you, and therefore nothing on earth that I desire is besides you. My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. I emphasize the yous there because of my fifth point. Know the source of your strength. After gaining back his heavenly perspective, Asaph recognizes that he is with God and God is with him. By being always with God, Asaph knows that though his heart falters, he will always have good counsel in the Lord. Everybody needs, today we promote counsel, often by feelings or circumstance. Everybody needs to do what they like that makes them feel good, and we're all victims and of our lives need to find healing within ourselves. This is not what the psalmist did, and this is not what God tells us to do either. Proverbs 3:5 says to trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't lean on your own understanding. When we trust God and see things from his perspective, we can see reality apart from Satan's lies. Only when we have this heavenly perspective can we see that God is everything we need and have, and that is truly enough. Like Asaph says here, we know that our flesh and heart may fail, but when we keep our eyes fixed on Christ, we can see that it is his strength that gives us our strength, and he is our substance forever. He closes here, verses 27 and 28. For behold, those who are far from you shall perish. You shall put an end to everyone who is unfaithful to you. But for me it is good to be near God, and I have made God my refuge, that I may tell of your works. So the author then just kind of sums up his thoughts here. He says, those that are far from God are going to perish. Not just dying in this life, but fire and judgment in the next. And he says it's good to be close to God and make him our refuge. The relationship with God is so that we may be the light for the rest of the world. Asaph understood that Israel's relationship with God was to be an example to the rest of the world. The Great Commission that Jesus gave his disciples wasn't new, like we've always been meant to be the light to the rest of the world. That's our purpose. That's why our relationship grows with God, is to further his kingdom here. This psalm dealt a direct blow in my heart, and I hope it does to you as well. Because even today, we can all apply this passage to our lives as we connect to Asaph's feelings about why the wicked live a good life and the righteous seem to suffer. These thoughts are not new to the human or Christian experience, and we can immediately relate to the author's feelings and why he needed to seek the solace in the Lord's presence. Just as Peter took his eyes off Christ in the storm, so do we when we allow the pleasures and the prosperity of the wicked and ungodly to cloud our judgments and let the emotions go. We must intentionally remember the truths of God, lest in our forgetfulness, the lies of the enemy take hold. We need to remember who God is so that we recognize the reality of this life, to better understand the struggles that we go through. So then by remembering our focus, we can know the source of our strength. When facing the human dilemma of questioning our injustice and those of others, we must remember to focus on Christ. Only by bringing God's heavenly viewpoint into our earthly one can we begin to understand and find peace in our pain. Besides, why are we envious of the prosperity of the wicked when we are heirs of heaven for all eternity? Let's pray.